There's a moment where you begin to notice something difficult to explain, not because it is complex, but because it is subtle. Nothing in your life has necessarily changed. The same people, the same situations, the same kinds of interactions, and yet your reaction to them feels different. At first, you may not even pay attention to it. It appears in small ways. A situation that would normally irritate you doesn't carry the same weight. A comment that would usually stay in your mind passes more quickly. An emotional response begins, but does not fully develop. And in that moment, you might not think much of it. You simply move on. But then it happens again and again in different contexts, with different people. The same pattern, less intensity, less reaction, less emotional involvement. And that is when the question begins to form. Why does this not affect me like before? This question is not always comfortable, because the change can feel ambiguous. On one hand, there is a sense of calm, a reduction of tension. Situations feel easier to navigate, less overwhelming, less consuming. But on the other hand, something feels unfamiliar, almost like a distance, not from the situation itself, but from the emotional response you would normally have. You may notice this in conversations. Someone says something that would have triggered you before, and you feel the beginning of a reaction, but it does not fully take over. It stops halfway, as if something interrupts the process. You are aware of what is happening, but you are not carried by it. This can feel like control at first, as if you are managing your emotions better. But if you look more closely, it does not feel like effort. You are not suppressing the reaction. You are not forcing yourself to stay calm. The intensity simply isn't there in the same way. And that is what makes the experience different. It is not something you are doing. It is something that is happening. You may also notice this in situations that used to stay with you, moments you would replay in your mind, conversations you would analyze, emotions that would linger for hours or even days. And now, those moments pass more quickly. They appear and then they fade, without the same need to revisit them, without the same mental reinforcement. At first, this can feel like relief, less emotional weight, less internal tension. But it can also feel confusing, because part of you expects a stronger reaction. You expect to feel more. And when you don't, it raises a question. Am I becoming indifferent? Do I care less than before? This is where the experience becomes more complex, because what is changing is not your capacity to feel, but your relationship to what you feel. The emotional response is still there, but it does not expand in the same way. It does not take over your attention. It does not define your experience as strongly, and this creates a sense of space between the event and your reaction to it. That space changes everything, because within it, the intensity cannot build in the same way. It does not escalate. It does not repeat itself. It remains contained. You feel it, but you are not overwhelmed by it. You may begin to notice that situations which once felt highly significant now feel more neutral, not meaningless, but less charged, less urgent, less defining. And this shift can extend to different areas of your life. Work, relationships, personal goals. Things that once carried strong emotional weight may now feel lighter, more distant, more manageable, but also less compelling. This is where the experience can feel unsettling, because intensity is often associated with importance. If something affects you strongly, it feels meaningful. If it does not, it can feel insignificant. And when that intensity decreases, you may question what it means. Why does this not feel as important as before? Why am I not reacting the way I used to? These questions do not always have immediate answers, but the experience itself is clear. Something has shifted. You are no longer responding to situations with the same emotional force. And that changes how everything feels. Less overwhelming, less dramatic, but also less defined by reaction. You are still present, still aware, still capable of feeling. But the way those feelings move through you has changed. They do not stay as long. They do not grow as much. They do not take over in the same way. And once this shift begins, it tends to continue, not as a complete transformation, but as a gradual change in how you experience your own emotions, a movement away from intensity towards something else. something quieter, something less immediate, something that feels different, even if you cannot fully explain it yet. What you are experiencing is not the disappearance of emotion. It is a reduction of what was amplifying it. For a long time, your emotional reactions were not only responses to what was happening in the moment, they were shaped by something deeper. Carl Jung described this in terms of psychic energy and projection. When an event carries strong emotional weight, it is rarely because of the event alone. It is because something within you is activated by it. A memory, an association, an unresolved tension, something that connects the present moment to a deeper layer of your psyche. And when that connection is strong, the reaction intensifies. The situation feels more important, more personal, more charged. This is why certain experiences affect you more than others, not because they are objectively more significant, but because they resonate with something inside you. Jung referred to this as emotional charge, a kind of psychic investment that gives certain experiences their intensity. And this charge is often linked to what remains unconscious, parts of your psyche that have not been fully recognized or integrated. When these parts are activated, they project themselves outward, onto people, onto situations, onto events that seem to cause the reaction. But in reality, the reaction is not only about what is happening externally, it is about what is being activated internally. This is why emotional intensity can feel disproportionate. A small comment can trigger a strong reaction. A minor situation can create extended emotional involvement because the external event is only part of the equation. The rest comes from within. As long as this internal material remains unconscious, the reaction feels immediate and justified. It feels like a direct response to the situation. But individuation begins to change this. As awareness deepens, the unconscious material that fuels these reactions becomes more visible. Not completely, but enough to create a shift. You start to recognize patterns in your emotional responses, similar reactions appearing in different situations, familiar feelings being triggered by different people, and gradually a realization forms. The intensity is not only coming from outside, it is being generated inside. And once this becomes clear, something begins to change. The projection starts to withdraw, not because you force it, but because you see it. And when projection withdraws, the emotional charge decreases. The same situation occurs, but it does not activate the same level of internal response. The reaction is still there, but it is lighter, more contained, less amplified. This is what you are beginning to experience. Not a loss of emotion, but a loss of amplification. The difference is subtle, but important, because amplification is what makes emotions feel overwhelming. It is what extends them, reinforces them, gives them a sense of urgency. Without that amplification, the emotion behaves differently. It appears, and then it passes. It does not expand into something larger. It does not dominate your attention. This is also connected to the reduction of mental repetition. At earlier stages, emotion and thought reinforce each other. You feel something, you think about it. The thinking intensifies the feeling, and the cycle continues. This is how emotional experiences become prolonged, not because the original event continues, but because the mind keeps it active. But as awareness increases, this cycle weakens. You still feel the emotion, but you do not reinforce it in the same way. You do not replay it continuously. You do not build additional layers of interpretation around it. And without that reinforcement, the emotion resolves more quickly. Jung saw this as part of integration. When unconscious material becomes conscious, it no longer needs to express itself through intense reactions. It can be experienced directly, without distortion, without exaggeration. This is why your reactions feel different now. Less immediate, less overwhelming, more stable. But this stability can feel unfamiliar, because intensity often gives a sense of clarity. It tells you what matters, what to focus on, what to respond to. Without that intensity, the experience becomes more neutral, more balanced, and that balance can feel like a loss at first, because it removes the extremes, the highs and the lows, the strong reactions that once defined your experience. But Jung did not see this as emotional dullness. He saw it as differentiation, a separation between the event and the unconscious material that was attached to it. This allows you to experience emotions more directly, without being carried by them, without them defining your entire perception. And this is where the shift becomes clear. You are not feeling less, you are feeling differently, without the added weight of unconscious projection, without the amplification that comes from unresolved tension. And this creates a new kind of experience, one that is less intense, but more precise, less overwhelming, but more stable, less reactive, but more aware. And that is what you are beginning to move into. At some point, the question begins to shift. You stop asking why the intensity is fading and start noticing what is taking its place, because something is replacing it, not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but gradually a different kind of emotional experience begins to form. At first, it may feel like neutrality, a lack of strong reaction, a sense that things no longer move you in the same way. And this can feel ambiguous, because without intensity, it is harder to measure what you feel. There are no clear spikes, no obvious emotional peaks. But if you stay with it, you begin to notice something more subtle. You are still feeling, just not in the same way. The emotion appears, but it does not take over. It does not define the entire moment. It remains part of the experience, without becoming the center of it. And this changes everything, because you are no longer being carried by your emotions. You are experiencing them. There's a difference. Before, an emotion would arise and expand. It would shape your thoughts, influence your perception, guide your behavior. Now it arises and remains contained. You feel it clearly, but you are not pulled into it. This creates a new kind of stability, not emotional suppression, but emotional presence. You are not pushing anything away. You are allowing it to exist without needing it to become something more. You may notice this in situations that used to escalate. A disagreement that would normally intensify now remains more balanced. You feel the reaction, but you do not amplify it. You respond, but without the same urgency. This also changes how quickly emotions resolve. Instead of lingering, they complete themselves more naturally. They arise, they move, and then they pass, without needing to be held in place by thought, without being repeated internally. This can feel lighter, less exhausting, because you are no longer sustaining the emotion through mental activity. You are allowing it to move on its own. At the same time, something else begins to develop, a different kind of sensitivity, not to intensity, but to subtlety. You start noticing smaller emotional shifts, more refined experiences, moments that may have gone unnoticed before, a quiet sense of connection, a subtle discomfort, a slight change in how something feels. These experiences are not dramatic, but they are clear, and they do not require intensity to be meaningful. This is where emotional life becomes more nuanced, less defined by extremes, more defined by awareness. You begin to trust these subtle signals, not because they are strong, but because they are accurate. They reflect what is happening without distortion, without exaggeration. And this creates a different relationship with emotion. You are no longer seeking strong reactions to confirm that something matters. You are recognizing meaning in quieter forms. This also changes how you relate to others. You are less reactive to their behavior, less influenced by their emotional states, not because you are disconnected, but because you are not merging with them in the same way. You can feel what is happening without being overwhelmed by it. This allows for a more stable kind of connection, one that is not driven by emotional fluctuations, one that does not depend on intensity to exist. And over time, this becomes more natural. You do not have to think about it. You do not have to manage it. It simply becomes part of how you experience yourself. Less reactive, more present, less driven by emotional momentum, more grounded in awareness. Carl Jung saw this as part of integration, not the absence of emotion, but the ability to experience it without being dominated by it. And this is what you are beginning to live. Not a loss, but a refinement. Not less feeling, but clearer feeling. And while it may feel unfamiliar at first, it becomes something you can trust, because it is not dependent on external triggers. It is not shaped by unconscious amplification. It is simply what is there, as it is, and that changes how you move through everything. There's a moment where the question changes. At first, it sounds like this: why don't I feel the same anymore? And behind that question, there is often a quiet concern, a sense that something important may be fading, that the intensity you once felt was a sign of connection, of meaning, of being fully alive. And now, without it, things feel different, less urgent, less overwhelming, less defined. But if you stay with the experience long enough, something becomes clear. You didn't lose your ability to feel. You change your relationship to what you feel. Carl Jung never described individuation as becoming detached from emotion. He described it as becoming conscious of it. And consciousness changes everything. Because once you are aware of how emotion forms, how it expands, how it connects to deeper parts of the psyche, you are no longer completely inside it. You can experience it without being carried away by it. And that is what you are beginning to live. Not a reduction of feeling, but a reduction of unconscious intensity. The kind that amplified everything, that made every reaction stronger, longer, more consuming. Without that amplification, emotion becomes clearer, more direct, more aligned with what is actually happening. And while that can feel less intense, it is also more stable, more real, because it is not being shaped by what is hidden. It is not being extended by repetition. It simply appears, and then it moves. This is why things feel different now. Not because they matter less, but because they're no longer distorted by unconscious weight. And that shift can feel unfamiliar, because intensity is easy to recognize. It gives immediate feedback. It tells you something is important. Without it, you have to rely on something quieter, something less obvious, but more precise. And over time, that precision becomes something you trust. You no longer need strong reactions to confirm what matters. You can feel it in a different way. Before we close, take a moment to reflect on something simple. Think about a situation that used to affect you strongly. Now, compare it to how it feels today. Is the situation less important, or is your reaction less amplified? That difference is where the shift is happening. If this resonates, write in the comments one moment where you notice yourself reacting differently than you used to. Not less, but differently. And if you know someone who feels like they are losing their emotional intensity and doesn't understand why, share this video with them. Because sometimes what feels like losing something is actually the beginning of experiencing it more clearly.